afternoon to everyone. Some of you are in daytime. For some of you, it's the middle of the night. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for showing up today. This is a great moment for me to be able, at the age of almost 82, to share these stories of our mentor, Don Elijio Panti, who lived such a brilliant and completely service-focused life, as many of us do. So I'd like to open with a prayer. We take a few deep breaths together. Feel yourself where you are, seated, feet on the ground. And let us feel roots from the sacrum down into Mother Gaia, wherever you may be. And I do believe we have pretty much spanned the globe today. So let us find each other's roots, deep into the roots of trees, plants, fungi, and connecting with each other through the admiration of this magnificent human being, Don Elijio Panti. In the name of the Father, and of the Mother, and of the Holy Spirit, in the name of Ischel and Mother Mary, in memory of Don Elijio Panti, great Maya shaman, traditional healer, herbalist, Dr. Clown of San Antonio, Belize in Central America. I ask for the presence of Ischel to join us today as we honor and give thanks for our mentor, for the life that he led of great simplicity, and yet the teachings that he passed to us have confounded professors and medical doctors. He has been a torch and a light around the world, especially for the healing of women. We are so grateful for what he taught us. We are grateful for those who taught him. And we acknowledge this land that once fed, housed, and held the ancient Maya people. We give thanks to all those who carried the torch back 5,000 years to this day, today, in 2023. I give thanks for all who came today. I give thanks for these stories, for the wonder, for the humor, and I ask that Ischel will illumine the lamp of my heart, that I may bring forth the wisdom, the humor, and the warmth of our mentor, Don Elijio Panti, and may it be so. Amen. And so, here we are. Do we have the pictures, Lou? Do you want to start that? We have some beautiful photographs that were taken by many different people of Don Elijio, and we would like to share those as I begin. I'd like to begin with where Don Elijio was born in 1893. Can you imagine? In 1893, Don Elijio was born in San Andreas, Guatemala, which is in the Petén, just across the border from Belize. So Don Elijio lived his entire life, his adult life, before there was television, airplanes, jets, computers, telephones, cell phones. The only thing he had was himself. So it's difficult even to imagine how it was to be living in Belize as a young boy when there were no roads to his town. So he came to, excuse me, he came to Belize in his mother's rebozo, which is the shawl that the Guatemalan women wear, carry their goods, their groceries, and their babies in. They left Guatemala because Don Eligio's father was an infamous necromancer. A necromancer is someone like an evil doer, someone who works evil magic on other human beings. So Nicanor, Don Eligio's father, got into a lot of trouble with the villagers because he was doing what is called encantaciones. He was enchanting women for his own benefit. He did a lot of black magic that people paid him for. And Don Elijio was always ashamed of that aspect of his father. But he actually, the father was actually responsible for a death in his village. So the townspeople were after him. They were going to kill him. So Nicanor's wife was Gertrudis, Don Eligio's mother. So in order to protect the family, she wrapped up her baby in her rebozo, and the three of them walked from Guatemala to La Colonia, which at the time is what Belize was called because it was British Honduras. So they walked to the border to British Honduras, and in those days, people just crossed back and forth. So the mother had relatives in Belize in a little town of Sucuts, and that's where the family settled. And Nicanor continued with his bad work. And he was a terrible drunk, and he used to come home and beat his mother and even beat Don Elijio in his drunken rages. So one day when Don Elijio was about 15, he told the story that he decided, I'm a man now, and my father will never hit my mother again as long as I live. And as long as I'm here to protect her, this will not happen again. So 15-year-old Don Elijio waited for his father to come home that night. And mind you, this was a thatch hut with dirt floors and a homemade hearth fire for cooking. So Don Elijio waited for his father, and it was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, came home in a drunken rage, and went to his mother where she was sleeping to pull her out of bed to beat her. Don Elijio grabbed his father by the neck, threw him to the floor, put his knee right into his neck with his machete in his hand over his face, and he said to him, Father, you will never lay a mean hand on my mother again as long as I live. If you do, I swear, Father, I will kill you. And Don Elijio said that was the last time his father ever beat his mother. So he was very, very proud of that moment. And that seemed to be like Don Elijio stepping into manhood at that moment. His father was eventually killed by another person. And Don Elijio always said that he never, ever wanted to follow that pathway. He was hoping and praying that the Maya spirits would show him a way to healing and to light, not to harming and to darkness, as he witnessed his father's career. So he grew up in that little town of Sucuts, and at the age of 16 or 17, he was already trading his corn for chocolate seeds, his beans for other types of vegetables that he could find. So one day he went to San Antonio, where he eventually lived for the rest of his life. He was there trading beans for chocolate. San Antonio at that time, this was now in 1910, about around 1910, San Antonio was already producing pretty large amounts of chocolate. So Don Elijio went there to trade his beans for chocolate. And he went to the home of Manuel Cid. And Manuel Cid had a daughter who was Gertrudis. And when Don Elijio saw her working at the hearth, turning tortillas, stirring the bean pot, he fell in love. He said, I looked at her. She was so plump, so brown, so beautiful, and her big black eyes looked at me and blinked, and my heart just opened to her. And I said to myself all the way home that day, she will be mine. She has to be mine. She will be mine. And then the next time he was on that route of trading, he asked Gertrude's father if he could marry his daughter. And Gertrude's father said, I know you. You're the son of that terrible man, Nicanor Panti. I'm not letting my daughter join your family. I would never put her in that kind of danger. So the answer is no. So Don Elijio went home brokenhearted. He came back a couple of times to court Gertrudis, and finally they together decided that they would marry with her father's permission. Excuse me. But Don Elijio would live in San Antonio with her family, and they would not follow the usual tradition of the bride coming to live with the groom's family. And that's how Don Elijio came to live in San Antonio. He and Gertrudis were married in 1911 or 1912. They had one child, a daughter, and they never had another child again. Don Elijio said it was something that he inherited. He was an only child, and his father was an only child. And as far back as he can remember, there were only one child born within their family lines. So their only girl was a young beauty. And when Don Elijio reached the age of about 30, he and Gertrudis decided that they would go to Chicle camp. So Chicle in those days means that they went into the high bush to gather the resin of the sapodilla tree. And that resin became chewing gum for the world's market. And Belize was one of the major producers. So in the 1920s, the way that you made a living in Belize was you went to Chicle camp, you went to rubber camp, or you went to mahogany camp, or you worked for the government. That was about the only way to make a living. Now, Don Elijio, remember, never went to school. There was no school in Secutz. There was no school in San Andreas in Guatemala. And until then, at that time, there was still no school in San Antonio. So Don Elijio decided he would become a chiclero to bring more income into the household. And in those days, you could bring your wife and family members because the women were there to do the cooking, sometimes the washing, and whatever they did was primarily, usually, the women's work. So Don Elijio, Gertrudis, and their daughter went to Chicle camp in 1920, and they continued that work for a number of years. Now, at Chicle camp is where Don Elijio met his mentor, Jeronimo Requena. Now, the interesting fact about Don Eligio's teacher is that he was not a Maya person. He was actually a Black Carib, which means he might have come from Haiti. He might have come from Jamaica. We really don't know where Don Eligio's teacher was born, but he was known as a Black Carib, which means that he was an African descendant who was now living in one of the Caribbean nations and ended up in Belize. So it was the end of a Chicle camp in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And Don Elijio had been observing Jeronimo as the bush doctor for all of the chicleros. The bush doctor was very, very important. All of the Chicle rubber and mahogany camps carried traditional healers, and they also carried midwives with them because there were many women attached to the Chicle camps that might have 100 people in the camp. And because women came along, often babies were born during Chicle camps. So there were healers along with them. Don Elijio observed Geronimo in action, and he thought, that's what I want to do. That's my path in life. I want to be a healer. I do not want to follow the path of my father. I want to help people, not harm people. So he became friends. He tried his best to befriend Geronimo. Geronimo was very standoffish, and Don Elijio would say, will you teach me? Will you teach me? And Geronimo would say, no, I can't teach you. You have too much blood. It's the way Don Elijio described it, like this, too much blood. I can't teach you now. You're too young. You need to be older. Well, the Chicleros did a great deal of rum drinking around the fire. And one night, seems like the bottle went around several times, and the Chicleros were getting drunk. And Geronimo began to brag that he could, anytime he wanted, he could shape shift and turn himself into a jaguar. Well, the men were incredulous, and they began poking him, not literally poking him, but saying, we don't believe you. That's a bunch of baloney. We don't believe you could turn yourself into jaguar. If it's true, prove it. And Geronimo said, all right, here's what I will do. I'm going to disappear off into the bush, into the blackness of the night. And when you hear a gunshot, you'll know that I'm on my way. And watch that ceiba tree right there. Watch that tree. And as a jaguar, you will see me climb up to the top of that tree as a cat. So said and so done. And so he went off into the bush, shot off his shotgun, and within moments, the men staring, Don Elijio as well, staring at the ceiba tree, and there goes a giant jaguar, one of those gold and black speckled ones, right up the top of the ceiba tree. And at one point, he turned around and stared down at the men and opened his big mouth and growled. And Don Elijio said all the Chicleros hit the ground and crossed themselves, begging, please, Mother Mary, protect us. And so Don Elijio hung his hammock that night next to where Geronimo was sleeping. And he said he stayed up all night watching and waiting for Geronimo to return from his shape shifting. And he said, I did not fall asleep, but all of a sudden there Geronimo appeared in the hammock out of nowhere, smelling like a cat. I'll never forget that, with strong odor of cat all around him. And so Don Elijio waited until midday when Geronimo finally woke up, stepped out of his hammock, and that's the day Don Elijio got down on his knees and said, please, maestro, teach me. I want to heal. My father was a necromancer. That is not my path. I want to heal. Fortunately, that was the last day of the Chicle camp for that year. I suppose that's why everybody was getting drunk too. And so Nicanor said, keep mixing up the names, Geronimo said, all right, boy, I will teach you. But you must promise that you will have patience with people. Why do you think I'm here? I'm in the Chicle camps because I have no patience with sick people. They call you names, they call you witch doctor, they laugh at you, and then in the middle of the night, somebody's knocking on your door to help them with the sick baby. I have no patience for that. But if you think you have patience to help people in that way, I will teach you. And so they had 30 days together when it was just Geronimo and Don Elijio in the Chicle camp with everyone else gone. They were simply there to watch all of the materials and the supplies until they sent a mule train to carry everything out. So Don Elijio had those 30 days with his teacher, and he said that all day they cut plants, collected plants, and at nighttime, his teacher would take the plant, squeeze it up, and put it to Don Eligio's nose and say, this is such and such. This is the anal. This is the cordoncillo. This is the chaca. So that he would learn to recognize them by taste, by aroma, and by feeling. And all day long, they traveled into the bush collecting leaves, digging up roots, and also barks. And that was Don Eligio's time with his teacher. After 30 days, they left the Chicle camp, and then Don Elijio invited his teacher to come live in his village with him so that they could continue this training. Well, after about a month after they had arrived from the Chicle camp, Geronimo was climbing a coconut tree, as Don Elijio explained, and fell from the coconut tree, broke his neck. And Don Elijio rushed to his side, held him in his arms as he died from this broken neck. And Geronimo said to Eligio, I die a happy man because what I know is now yours. You will carry on. And that was it for Don Elijio. He never had another day with his teacher. He did have one more teacher who was the oldest member of the village in San Antonio, who was actually a Mexican. So I only recently realized that the traditional healing system handed down from Don Elijio is actually Guatemalan, Caribbean, and Mexican. It has those three roots to it because his teacher was a Caribbean Carib, and then he came from Guatemala. So what he learned from his parents would have been Guatemalan traditional healing. And then his last teacher was Manuel Cid, who came to Belize in 1910 to San Antonio because of the Guerra de las Castas, the caste war in Mexico, which was the very last Indian uprising of the Maya people against the Spaniards. And so many people left because of the war, and they came to La Colonia from Mexico. And Don Manuel reached San Antonio around the age of 50, and that man lived to be 115. 115. And Don Elijio was his student for the rest of his life. However, after several years, Don Elijio didn't need training anymore. He had what he had already been taught, and then the Maya spirits took over his training in dream visions. Whenever you asked Don Elijio who was your teacher, he always pointed to the sky. So that black and white photograph that many of you have with Don Eligio's finger pointing up to the sky is an answer to the question, who was your teacher? But those are the stories that he told me about how he learned about the bush medicine. And for the rest of his life, after that short time he had with Manuel, he was taught through dream visions by the Maya spirits. And he explained to me that, for instance, once I was treating a woman for a cough, and she was coming every day for her tea. So I gave her her dry herbs, and she went home, and the cough was not getting better. And then one night I had a dream, and in the dream, a Maya spirit, and he said they always come in two. One spirit is dressed like sort of a Lacandone Maya Indian in a simple hand-woven plain tunic, long hair. And the other one is dressed in full ancient Maya regalia. The other spirit has a stake with feathers on it. He has a large quetzal feather headdress. He's draped in jaguar skins and jaded boots and jade bracelets and jade necklace. But the other one is simply a very, very humble Maya peasant. And that's always the one who speaks to him in his dreams. So in this dream, the Maya spirit said, Don Elijio Panti, you do not understand this woman's sickness. That is a lung infection. It is not just a cough. And these are the plants you should give her. So they would show him, as if he were in the bush, show him the plants or the tree bark that they should give the client. And he said he lost count of how many times that happened in his life. And I always felt that that was so generous and so tender and loving of the Maya spirits to look after his people that way, that when Don Elijio didn't get it right, they were there for a correction of the formula that he was using. All right, we did the Chicle camp, the Mexican teacher. The interesting thing about Manuel Cid is that, who was Don Eligio's teacher from Mexico. He, at the age of 65, became a widower, and he married a 15-year-old girl. And that girl died at the age of 65, and Manuel was still alive until 115. So a 65-year-old man married a 15-year-old girl, which, you know, in those villages was not that uncommon because everybody wants a young girl. So he outlived her. So I met Don Manuel Cid when he was in his hammock. He was no longer able to stand up. And I went to talk to him one day just to have a chat. And he leaned his head up out of his hammock and he said, "That'll be $20. So I gave him $20, and then he was willing to sit and talk to me for most of the morning. So there's Don Eligio's picture pointing up to the sky saying, answering the question, who was your teacher? This one with the checkered shirt was actually taken by the National Geographic Society when they came to film Don Elijio in his village. And that, the history of the Maya, I think it's called, and that's still available somewhere online. I often see it show up. Right. So the sad, every life has some sadness to it. One of the sadnesses of Don Eligio's life was the death of his wife, Chinda. Eventually, she had always had some health problem with her stomach. So she got very sick at the age of 80, I guess it had been around 80 years old. And her son insisted that she go to the hospital. No, her grandson insisted that she go to the hospital. Don Elijio did not want to take her to the hospital. He thought he could take care of her himself, but their grandson insisted because they said the villagers would ridicule them if they didn't do the best they could for their grandmother, and that meant taking her to the hospital to be seen by medical doctors. They took her to the hospital. Don Elijio went them by bus. They left her they got her in the hospital, got her admitted, and Don Elijio stayed with her overnight. It was in December, and that was the time that he was harvesting these very special breed of beans that are called Christmas beans. And you have to harvest them at a certain time or they're no longer edible. So Don Elijio had to leave his wife in the hospital and go home to harvest his Christmas beans. And while he was in the field harvesting the beans, he said he felt like the earth was opening up under him, and he felt like his heart stopped for a moment. And he said, "Eso es algo." This is something. So he dropped everything, quickly ran back to his village, and he said people were already gathering at his house because it had been announced on the radio that Gertrudis Panti had passed away in the hospital that morning. And it was one of the greatest sadnesses of his life. And the feeling that he had abandoned his wife and left her alone in the hospital, and then she died alone. So it turns out that when they went to the hospital to collect her, bring her home for the funeral, one of the nurses said, "You know, this didn't have to happen. I'm ashamed to tell you that she had this abdominal surgery and that they told her nurses that she was not to eat anything for 24 hours. And they told Don Elijio a very careless nurse dropped a whole tray of normal food in front of her, and she ate it, and within an hour or two, she was dead. And that made Don Elijio feel like if he had been there, is what he told me, had I been there, that never would have happened. I would have taken so much better care of her. But me, fool that I am, I wanted to go home and harvest my beans, and now my wife is dead. And so that caused Don Elijio to go into a drunk period for about 3 years. He didn't come out of it for a full 3 years, and where he drank himself to sleep every single day because of the grief and the guilt. And he said that night and day, he was drunk. And when people came to see him for healing, he had a very busy practice already at that time. He said they couldn't find me because I was asleep, snoring in the hammock, or I was in the rum shop drinking. Finally, his relatives in Guatemala heard that he was in the state where he had not stopped drinking for a full 3 years. They came to Belize to look after him. And he said they actually tied him to a post to his bed so that he couldn't get out of bed and continue drinking. And he said it was the best thing they ever did. And after that time with his family from Guatemala, it was a 3-month period where they looked after him and kept all the alcohol away, that finally he came out of that. And then I met him only 2 years after that. His wife had only been dead 4 years or less when I met him in 1983. And by that time, he was already quite lonely. And at the age of 90, he still, as many of you remember, he still had no student, no apprentice, and he was definitely very unhappy about going to the grave con mi lámpara. No quiero ir al panteón con mi lámpara. I don't want to go to my grave with my lamp. And so I had heard about Don Elijio, and I was looking for him, trying to figure out how I would go to San Antonio to meet him, because I had come to Belize to run my practice in natural healing. And of course, already I'm a doctor of naturopathy, have my clinic set up, but I need medicinal plants. I had brought a number of plants from the States and stored them in glass gallon jars. And because of the moisture in the tropics, they were rotting in the jars. I was having a terrible time keeping my plants fresh. So I'm trying to figure out how I can get to see Don Elijio. And then he shows up at my clinic one day. I'm coming home from the market with a bag of mangoes, and I look over at the side on the veranda outside the clinic, and I see this old man sitting on the porch, and I assume he's there as a patient. So I said, "Buenos dias, I'll attend to you as soon as I can. It'll be a few moments. Please be patient." So I put everything down, open up the windows and get my clinic set up again. And I open the door and invite him in. And then he's looking curiously at my herbs. And he says, "Oh, so you are the American herbalist, true?" I said, yes. How do you do? I'm Rosita. I'm a herbalist from America. And he says, "Oh, okay. Well, I came to see if you have the herb that's called flor de tilo. Do you know that herb? That's linden flower." And I said, "Flor de tilo? Of course I know it. That's my favorite herb." And he said, "That's the one I need." He said, "I'm a widower. My wife died a few years ago, and ever since she died, I haven't been able to sleep. When my wife was alive, she would hug me and caress me and kiss me." And then he went all night long. "And if I woke up and the blanket fell off, we were both in a hammock, she would reach over and caress me, and she was big and fat, so all her body kept me warm all night long. Now I sleep alone in my hammock. There's no kissing, And when I roll over, the blanket falls to the floor. A blanket is not like a blanket of guts. What I need is a blanket of guts. So because I have no blanket of guts, I need my linden flower so I can sleep. So I had it. I put it into a little paper bag for him, and he's looking at the herbs. And he said, "That's no way to take care of herbs." And I said, "Really? What's wrong? They keep rotting in those glass jars." And he said, "Well, you can't keep them in glass jars in the tropics. You need to put them in paper bags. And then every once in a while, take them in the paper bags outside in the sun to keep them dry." Oh, and I said, "So what's your name?" And he said, "Oh, I'm Don Elijio Panti from San Antonio." Well, I nearly dropped my glass jar, and I said, "Oh, you're Don Elijio Panti from San Antonio. I've been looking for you. I'm trying to find you. I need someone to teach me about the medicinal plants of Belize. As you can see, I have a problem. My herbs are all rotting." And he said, like this, he said, "Well, I'm in San Antonio." I said, "May I come visit you?" He said, "Yes, come. There I will be, ni más ni menos. I'll be there, neither more nor less than you see right here in front of you." So that was extremely meaningful to me. Before we left Chicago for Belize to live there, my husband and I met at the College of Naturopathy. We were in the same class. We graduated together, and I had already been to Belize, and I wanted to return to Belize. The reason I wanted to come back to Belize to live after we both got our degrees in naturopathy was, number one, for medical freedom. In the United States at that time, there was a big surge of prosecutions against natural healers, especially anyone who opened an office or a clinic and was touting natural therapies, herbal remedies, even body work. So I went to Belize for medical freedom, also for a year-round growing season. As a natural food vegetarian, I find that extremely important, and for racial harmony. Many different races live together in Belize, and I'd say that the racial harmony is pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. So when we told our family members that we were leaving the States and going to live in Belize, a third world country, where actually at the time there was a lot of cholera raging throughout Central America. Well, you can imagine it was a big brouhaha with our family members that we shouldn't go to Central America. We shouldn't take our little girl, my daughter, Crystal, who was only 4 at the time, into this dangerous environment. So we were both contemplating what should we do. And that was the very first dream vision as a result of that consternation that came to me from the Maya spirits. So in the dream, one night, again, I kind of see myself in bed, tossing and turning with the very worried look on my face. And in the dream, I see myself sitting on a bus in Chicago, and I'm lost. I don't know why I'm on this bus. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I should get off. I'm just kind of very confused. Now I'm sitting on those seats as you enter the bus, and they're parallel to each other, not like that, they're parallel. So I'm looking at people across from me. And a lady has a newspaper on her lap. Directly across from me, she lifts up the newspaper and snaps it open. And the headlines are this big, like 6-inch letters in big, bold black letters. And it says, "Have faith." Nothing more. That was the only message, 2 words, "have faith." When I told my husband about that dream in the morning, we both agreed, we're going. It's all going to be all right. And so, yes, in that next year is when I met Don Elijio. And after that, I went to visit him regularly, one day of every week for the next full year. I did all kind of things for him. I swept out his area, his yard. I did some housekeeping. I actually used to give enemas to his female clients. I collected a lot of herbs. I even got firewood because he was already, 90, 91 years old now. And it was hard for him to go out and collect firewood because he was by then quite rheumatic. There's his little clinic you see off to the far right. And there is the end of our day. So after with the herbs that we collected, he's dropping them on the floor. And I would sit there and chop herbs for the entire afternoon. So I go every day for a full year. And at the end, all during the year, I'm asking, Don Elijio, will you teach me? I'm already a doctor. I've already studied herbology, but I do not know the medicinal plants of Belize. I really need a teacher. No, I can't teach a gringa. It would do no good to teach a gringa. So anyway, I keep going because I really adore this man. And sitting outside his door on a bench, listening to him chat with his clients and take care of his patients, I was so enthralled. It was a usual routine. Where are you from? What's your problem? Here's what you need. Maybe it's a massage. Here's a bag of herbs. And then starts the laughter. And Don Elijio absolutely put on a performance for every client who came to see him. Because you remember, he said, laughter is the most important part of healing. Most people think too much. Get them to laugh, and half their trouble and sickness will go away, and the blessed herbs will do the rest. So after one full year, now this day I got a ride to San Antonio, so I was hours earlier than usual. So I'm standing at his door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the door opens, and there's Don Elijio with his machete and a pick, and he's got a woven basket on his head. There's a strap of woven straw here, and the basket is like probably 3 feet long down his back. And he looked at me in such a way that was, oh no, she's here again. So I thought, well, this is my last day. I'm never coming back again. It seems like I'm bothering this poor old man. It's certainly not my intention. So this is my last day. And he said, I don't have time for you today. I've had so many patients all week. I haven't had time to collect my corn. And it's past harvest time. The corn is going to start sprouting in the field. So I don't have time today. And I said, well, I'll help you harvest corn. And he said, you're from Chicago. What do you know about harvesting corn? I said, Don Eligio, I lived 7 years in Mexico before I came to Belize, so I know how to harvest corn. Let's go, I'll help you. So he handed me one of those Maya baskets. I put it around my head and off we go. Now, Don Elijio was now 91 or 92, and it was a 90-minute walk to his cornfield, 90 minutes of walking to the cornfield, because he said when he first started growing corn, it was a 10-minute walk. But because of deforestation, burning of the fields, and clearing the area for cattle and for the expansion of the village, now to grow corn, it was a 90-minute walk away from the village. And it was incredible to think that at this age, Don Elijio would walk 90 minutes and then clear a field to grow corn. So we're off now, and we get there, and he said, here's my cornfield. I don't see anything. Looking around, all I see is high bush. And he said, well, we have to crawl on our stomachs to get to the cornfield. So I'm literally on my stomach, crawling through about 20 or 30 feet of high bush. And as we come out, I come out of the bush and I look up, and there's his cornfield like this. It's a mountainside straight up. And there he had cleared that mountain, planted the corn, cultivated, and now was willing to harvest it basket by basket, carrying it home on his forehead. And that field of corn fed 15 people for the whole year. So finally, I'm throwing corn into my basket. Don Eligio's throwing corn into his basket. And we meet in the middle about 10 a.m. in the morning. So I'm coming down this row, he's coming down this row. I'm perspiring and he's perspiring, and I dump my big basket of corn into my pile that's now about 4 feet high. And he looks at me, he looks at the pile of corn, and he said, "Are you married?" And I said, "Yes, yes, Don Elijio, I'm married and I have 3 children." And he said, "Oh, that long, oh." All right, so we continue collecting the corn. And then around noon, now we're at the top of the mountain. And Don Eligio is sitting next to me, and I have an orange, and I peel the orange, I give half to him, and then he's eating the orange. And when he finishes his little bit, he stands up and he says to me, "¿Qué es que tú quieres?" What is it that you want? And I said, and as I begin to speak, the sun rises behind him, because we are at this mountain. There's another mountain here, and the sun is just coming up over this one. So now Don Elijio is completely enveloped in a giant ring of golden sunlight. It was sparkling and golden. It was breathtaking. It was some most magical moment. And he stood up and he said, "Do you promise, if I take the time to teach you, you will take care of my people when I'm gone?" Gah. That was a lifetime promise that I made, and my husband wasn't even there. That was kind of scary. So I said, "Yes, Don Elijio, I promise." And that was the day that my 13-year apprenticeship with the great Maya shaman began. And on the way home, we're carrying the basket of corn. He used to have a horse, but now at 90, he wasn't able to handle a horse anymore because he had cataracts and his eyesight was getting very poor. So he carried all of that corn home that fed 15 people for a year on his head in that basket. So all the way home, I'm pointing to this plant that I've been looking at with its bright yellow flowers, and I'm saying to it, "I wonder what you are. I wonder what you heal. You look like medicine, but I have no idea who you are. And I really, really want to know." And I'd say, "Don Elijio, what is that plant with the yellow flowers?" Oh, he gave me the name. He told me what it's for. He said, "This is anal, and anal is good for skin condition. There's the chaca, the gumbo limbo. You see that red shaggy bark? We use that for poison wood infection. We use it to build the blood." And then plant after plant and tree after tree until my head was this big with facts. And of course, I remembered absolutely nothing. One of the interesting things was, of the 13-year apprenticeship with Don Elijio, I felt like I remembered nothing for 4 years. After 4 years with Don Elijio, I went off into the forest one day to collect some tree bark for my own clinic. I was looking for the tree bark that was good for diarrhea, because we're in the tropics and there are a lot of parasites and there are a lot of tummy problems, and diarrhea is a very common condition here. So I went off looking for this tree bark, and I got the wrong bark. And I didn't use it on any clients, thankfully, until I showed it to Don Elijio. He said, "No, no, no, that's not it." So that was after 4 years of working with him. And it wasn't until after that big mistake that I made with the wrong tree bark that somehow everything just started to fall into place. I don't know what the importance of that mistake I made was, but it was after that moment that I realized I'm not getting this. Something is missing here. So finally, after that, I began to make sense of it, and I began to remember the plants and the trees. And remember, Don Elijio was able to identify 500 different plants from his living memory. So he agrees to teach me, and then begins our apprenticeship. So the next week, I go to Don Eligio's clinic as proud can be. I'm the student of a Maya traditional healer. I didn't know Don Elijio was a shaman when we first met. Now, to get to Don Eligio's clinic, I crossed the river on foot with my backpack on my head, my notebook and pen, no cell phone at that time, walk across the river on foot, and then a mile through the jungle, and then a 5-mile walk on the road, a dirt road that was extremely dangerous because it was the road that they drove on to bring down the mahogany logs from the mountain pine ridge. And so these logging trucks, it was a really narrow 2-lane road, but the logging trucks took up the whole road when they came around the bend. So often I could hear them, but not see them coming. And I'd have to jump off the road or get run down by logging trucks. So it was a 2-hour walk. So I arrived the first day and I'm so excited. And Don Elijio welcomes me and I put my backpack away. He gives me a little spot where I can put my things. And I'm sitting on the little bench in his very, very hot 1-room little clinic. It was a 10 by 12 room that was split into 2 rooms. One half was where he slept and where he had his big wooden box full of money. All the money that Don Elijio collected, he kept in a big wooden box. And one of my eventual chores was to separate all the bills because he couldn't read even the numbers on the bills. But because illiteracy at that time was still pretty big in Belize, they made all the bills different colors. So people could tell a 10 or a 5 from a 50 because they're all different colors. So one of my jobs was to separate all of the bills and stack them up. There were stacks this high of bills in that little box. So it's the first day. I'm sitting on the little bench waiting, very excited for the first patient to arrive, and I'm going to learn what Don Elijio does. And we hear a car pull up and 4 doors open and 4 doors close. And here come 2 men. They say they're from Guatemala. And this is our mother. And they have this lady in her 50s holding her each by an arm like this. And this lady is, how could I say it? She's delirious. Her eyes don't focus and she's literally like that. And she can't walk. They're basically dragging her and they set her down. And she continues this literally growling like an animal. Her tongue is loose and hanging. Her eyes don't focus. They're going all over the room. And Don Elijio says, now we're really going to do some work. Get ready. This work, vamos a trabajar. And he said, you go light the coals. Bring me some coals for the copal. So I go into the other little thatch hut where he had his kitchen when Chinda was alive. And the chicken is in the coals. So I have to chase the chicken out of the coals and start a little fire to get up just a little bit of embers for his copal. So while I'm there, Don Elijio is saying prayers for the lady, saying prayers, and he's sprinkling her with holy water, saying the prayers, and I bring the coals in, and he's got a coffee can with a little wire holding it. That's his copalero. That's how he burns copal. So he throws copal grains into that can, and then I'm moving it all around her, and he's saying prayers in Maya. And then I go off to the kitchen, and he says, now go boil some zorillo. Here's the root, go boil this now and get it ready for her. And as I walk out the door, he says, this woman is possessed by the devil. Well, I tell you what, I could still feel that feeling in myself right now where all of the organs inside drop. And I felt so frightened. I thought, what? Possessed by the devil? And I tell you, standing in that woman's field, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and they went like this. And this is the very first client. So I'm in the little hut boiling the Sorio tea, trying to keep this fire going, and it's kind of damp outside. All the wood is damp. So I'm blowing and blowing on the coals. I get the tea boiling, and I'm standing there thinking, this is not what I signed up for. Possessed by the devil, evil magic. I thought that's what his father did. I didn't think that's what he did. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if I should be here. Maybe I should go home. I don't think I want to do this. So I take the Zorillo tea and I give it to Don Elijio. He hands it to the lady and she goes, it's in a gourd bowl, not a cup. It's a gourd bowl that he made himself. And she takes the Zorillo, the skunk root, and goes gloop, 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 gloop. She hands it to me. And when she handed that back to me, she made the first eye contact since she walked into his clinic. And when she gave me the bowl and looked in my eyes, these two long tears came flowing down her face. And when I saw those two tears, all my fears went away. I don't know what the connection was, but my heart just opened to her, and something inside of me said, just put your fears aside. You got work to do here. So he said, after she drank that tea, she started to act like she was going to throw up. So he said, Rosita, take her outside and take care of her. So I take her by the arm and we walk several steps away from the house, and I'm got her, she's leaning on a tree and she starts to throw up. Well, this woman vomited up a whole ball of hair. And that was part of the magic. That was part of the evil spell that someone had put on her. So she throws up this big ball of hair. And when that was out, she kind of shook her head, blinked her eyes, and looked around like she's awake for the first time. So we go back inside to Don Eligio's little clinic. She sits down on the stool and he continues to say more prayers for her, more copal and more holy water. And then he gives the family a whole bag of Zorillo tea for them to continue drinking. And so I'm still thinking, is this really what I want to do? And I'm also aware somewhere that this is a test by the Maya spirits. Is this really what you want to do? This is what it's going to involve. Are you willing and are you able to handle this type of healing? So we go through the rest of the day, and the rest of the day is tummy aches and baby fever and skin condition, lovely things that I really love. So that night, I'm spending the night with him because I had agreed I would stay for 3 nights and 4 days of every single week. So this is the first night. And in the hammock, again, Don Elijio now at 7 p.m. closes all the windows in the house and the door. There's only 2 windows to begin with. And at 7 o'clock, it's still hot. And his little 1-room house had a tin roof. And so it heats up incredibly all day long. And at nighttime, it's still in the house, especially if you close the doors and windows. So it's really hot. I'm in my hammock. It's 7 p.m. It's bedtime. Don Elijio is behind the curtain in the other little room in his hammock. Then he starts to talk, and he doesn't stop talking until about 3 a.m. in the morning. And that was one of the services that I provided for him, was comfort at nighttime with someone to talk to because he was an insomniac. And that's how I heard for the next 7 years of going there 3 nights and 4 days for that period of time, how I heard the same stories again and again and again. And which is why when I sat down to write Sastun, it was just like from memory, every story with every nuance and every word just came flooding out like a river. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning, the first night after the possessed woman. And I see myself in the hammock and I'm looking very worried. Again, my face is all kind of crunched up. And Don Elijio had warned me that when the Maya spirits bring a vision dream, they're very, very rough. They sometimes will punch you, not punch you, but they will do things like this, or they tickle your feet. And in this dream, they've got my hammock and they're taking the hammock back and forth. And in the dream, my hammock is flying back and forth. And it's really like, I feel like I'm going to fall out of the hammock. And then boom, all of a sudden, the dream vision starts. And in this dream, I am completely surrounded by 4 giant angelic beings. So Don Eligio's treatment was the rue in a little bit of water that he gave this lady to drink, and then the copal, and then that zorio. So in this dream, I see myself in the hammock, and on my left side is an angel that I just know is the angel of copal. She's the color of copal, like brilliant amber. And her shining auric field is like 10 feet wide, and she's about 15 feet tall. And she's just standing there, wings open, looking down at me. Not a word was spoken. At my feet, I recognize the angel of Ru, and she's sparkling, sparkling green, like green earthen light. And she too has an auric field that's sparkling 10 feet wide, and she's 15 feet tall. And on this side is Zorio. And Zorio is just like all different colors beaming. These 3 angels are just looking down at me, and I feel myself enveloped in this warm, protective light. There's one more, and that's Saint Michael behind me. Now, Saint Michael, he showed himself, and he's a dude with black leather jacket and black leather pants, and he's got a shield and a spear. And he's actually standing like this, with his shield out and his spear pointed, and kind of saying, just try it. Take one step towards her and see what happens. He's like protecting, watching the perimeter with his spear and his shield. And so not a word was said, but it was so clear, we got your back. And those plant spirits came to me to comfort me, because number one, they didn't want Don Elijio to live the rest of his life alone and without an apprentice. And it was somehow ordained that I should be there. And it was a message that said, yes, it's scary, but we're here. So that was my very first day in Don Elijio's clinic. And for the rest of the 7 years that I was there, many different dream visions occurred. Don Elijio had many dream visions as well. And that little house was like the house of the 7 drawers, where all the spirits came to gather at nighttime. He told me, he said, they come here for companionship. They're lonely just like me. And so they come here to play at nighttime. They go like this on my face. They rub my feet. They pull my hammock. They're just mischievous earth spirits, nothing to be afraid of. So our daily routines were very routine. I would arrive usually on a Monday, and I would stay until Thursday. Thank God for my neighbor, Lucy Fleming, who owns Chalk Creek Resort. She was there to take care of my little girl, and thank to my husband that he was there to look after my child. And remember, at this time, we also had a 32 acres of high jungle bush that we're clearing and trying to turn into a livable tropical homestead. That when we started, there was no water, there was no power, there was no house, just a piece of raw land where we built 2 thatch huts, and we're about 50 feet above the river. So all of that was going on, as well as childcare back at my farm. So our daily routines were pretty simple. We get up at 6 in the morning, gather up our collection bags, a machete and a pick, sometimes a shovel, and we would walk 90 minutes to the mountainside where there we are right there. That picture was taken by Michael Ballack, who eventually came from the botanical garden to meet Don Elijio. And this is coming back from our collection trip. And we're walking down that old logging road coming back to San Antonio. And Don Elijio has the Zorillo plant right there in his hands. That is the vine of the root. There's Don Elijio on the far right on the bottom, bringing home firewood so he can have a fire for his patients to cook their food while they're living with him. So we would walk to the bush and collect plants until 11 in the morning, come home just like you see there with sacks on our back, even collecting on the way home. We would collect vines, roots, and barks, and then on the way home, collect the leaves for the herbal baths. And the leaves had to be in the amount of about a 50-pound sack. If you could imagine that size, that was the amount of leaves we had to gather every day for the herbal baths. So then we would bring the herbs home there. As you see, there's Don Elijio dropping the Zorillo roots, and we would sit chopping all afternoon until the clients began to arrive around 1 in the afternoon. In between clients, we chopped medicine. And so he would see patients from 1 until 7. And there was a wide range. There you see, he's got his little basket of leaves, and he's giving this lady a bag of leaves for her herbal baths for her chronic headaches. That's his little hut where his clients could sleep if they had to stay with him. Some people stayed with him for weeks and some for months. You see in the top corner, there's the Sastun. Reading the Sastun was a huge part of every day. There it is in his hands there. People from all over Central America came to sacar su suerte, pull out your luck. Don Eligio Sastun was teleported to him after he had been working with the Maya spirits for several years. He was always praying and asking that they would send him a Sastun so that he could really do their work properly. Finally, after 2 years of primicias, he did 18 primicias. And then at the end of the 18th primicia, the following day, he went off to the field to collect medicine. And when he came home, he laid in his hammock to take a rest. And his wife came to him and said, "Hey, look what I found today in your hammock." And there was his Sastun. So the Sastun is a magic instrument used by the Maya shamans. There are many different types. This is Don Eligio's, about the size of a child's marble. It looks very unspecial, very inconspicuous, but it is a powerful magical instrument with which Don Elijio could do divinations and incantations. So he would put the Sastun in that little clay jar, twirl it around on the table, and say his Maya chant 9 times, repeating and repeating, "Show me, give me the answer to this question. Give me the answer. Is this person sickness from envy? Is this person's sickness natural? Or is this person's sickness something that somebody did to them? Is this evil magic? Is this envy? Is this natural?" And so the person would put the Sastun in their hand and shake it like a pair of dice. And then Don Elijio would take them over to the light. And in the Sastun, he could read bubbles and lines. And the way that they aggregated inside that little clear crystal ball was the answer. And the answer had to be yes or no. There were no complicated long answers. It could only be yes or no that Don Elijio could read in the Sastun. I was never able to read the Sastun, and I feel like it, in a way, it was a blessing to me, because I always said I'm a physician, not a magician. Because of the Sastun, Don Elijio was famous and infamous. It was the work with the sastun that people saw as evil magic, most especially his own family, who were evangelical Christians. And they really believed that all of this was evil spirits at work through Don Elijio. Of course, nothing was further from the truth. Don Elijio always worked with the benevolent Maya spirits. So after several years of working with Don Elijio, a Maya spirit appeared to him in a dream and said, "Old man, we see that you're working very, very hard. And in the morning, we are going to bring you a gift to strengthen your work." He opened the door, and there was that crystal sitting on his doorstep. And that little crystal, not so little, you can see it's about 6 or 7 inches tall and about 4 inches wide. And look how happy Don Elijio looks and so proud that the Maya spirits paid attention. They saw that he was getting old and getting tired, and you need some extra help. You need some more strength, is what they told him. And literally in the morning, he opened the door and there was the crystal on his doorstep. This other picture over here to the left on the top is our Don Eligio's stingray spines. So the stingray spine work was an important part of Don Eligio's healing practice. It was very much like acupuncture. I have a friend who's an acupuncturist in Chicago, and she came for a month to join me at the clinic in Don Eligio's, and she observed him using the stingray spines from the stingray, the little tail at the end as a little needle, and the fishermen used to collect them and get them for Don Elijio. And she said that his system of puncturing, which is called pinchar in Spanish. Pinchar just means to puncture, like with a thorn or something, in this case, the stingray tail. That his system of pinchar was 85% similar to the Chinese system. For instance, I saw Don Elijio use the stingray spine to puncture the large toe of a person with chronic headaches. And I saw him use the stingray spine on the forehead. The most dramatic I ever saw with the stingray spines were with the policeman from San Antonio who came to see him because of his chronic headaches. Don Elijio looked at the policeman who's wearing his uniform and his holster and gun on his side. And he said to the policeman, a young man, he said, "Are you brave?" And the man said, "Yeah, I'm brave. Why? Why do you ask?" And Don Elijio said, "I can cure your headaches, but I have to use this stingray spine. Do you think you can handle it?" And the guy, I'm translating because he didn't speak Spanish, and he said, "I'll do anything. Just help me get rid of these headaches." So Don Elijio took his stingray, pinched this little piece of flesh on the side and went pop, pop, pop 3 times on this side. Pulled this flesh, pop, pop 3 times over here and 3 times in the middle. And then he put the man's head down like this, leaning forward, and began to drip this blood. And the blood was so foul smelling, you could hardly stand in the room. And as that blood hit the floor, it turned to jello. This was the first time I had actually seen coagulated, congested, toxic blood come out of a human being. And it smelled like dead tissue. And literally, when it hit the floor and oxidized, it turned into a ball of jelly-like material because the blood had been so congested for so many years that it turned into a different substance. And he came back for a second treatment, and we gave him herbs to wash his head. And as Don Elijio would say, adios dolor, goodbye pain, never a headache again. So Spiritual healing was, of course, a very big part of our daily routine with Don Elijio. People would come especially with what is called NVIDIA. NVIDIA or envy, jealousy, was the most common spiritual ailment, as well as fright or PTSD. That is what he spent most of his time treating, was fright or susto and envy and jealousy. And so the treatment was always the same. Where are you from? What's your problem? Oh, this sounds like it could be physical or it could be spiritual. You would get the sastun and twirl and ask, is this problem physical or is this spiritual? Physical or spiritual? Sastun, tell me. Nueve veces, round and round it would go. The person puts the sastun in her hand, shakes it like a dice, and Don Eligio could read it and say, yes, this is evil. This is not natural. Somebody is envying you. Yes, this is somebody's done something bad to you, meaning black magic. So the treatment was always prayer. We always begin with prayer. And many of you know that there were 3 prayers in the right pulse, very specific prayer for envy in Maya, of course, and a specific prayer for fright. 3 prayers in the right, 3 prayers in the left, and 3 prayers over the forehead. Then Don Elijio would give them a little package of copal to take home to burn in their environment, and then a large bag of the herbs that we collected that morning for bathing. And he said the bathing was done with prayer, that you put the herbs in. He liked to boil the herbs for baths. I don't boil them. I like to squeeze them like this. So they would prepare their bath with prayers and then wash themselves like this, throwing, and he did very good job of explaining how to throw the bath water over themselves, and they should come back in 10 days. And then he gave them a little amulet, the protección. If it was envy, most definitely they had to go home with an amulet or the protección. So a little black amulet that contained plants that were excellent at holding the spiritual charge of the prayer and the charge of the sastun around it. It was a little tree bark, a sprig of rue, a few drops of copal, and some balsam bark. So there are usually 4 items in that protección or the amulet. And I spent most of my time sewing up those amulets for him, because he could no longer see. And of course, his wife used to do that for him. After she passed away, he was sewing his own amulets, but his eyesight was getting too poor. So the person would get their own amulet that was enchanted specifically. There's my amulet bag right there, specifically for the purpose of warding off evil, to protect them from another person's envy. Now, this photograph here is the one over to the left, is in 1987, a couple of years after I began to work with the maestro. Don Elijio said, it's time to perform a Maya primicia to introduce you to the 9 benevolent Maya spirits as my disciple. I want them to look after you when I'm gone. So I need you to meet them. And the way we do that is to perform a primicia. First time I heard that word, oh, what's a primicia? And he said, well, it's a ceremony to honor the 9 Maya spirits. We will have 9 gourd bowls with chocolate. So you could use cornatoli or you could use chocolate as an offering to the spirits. Cornatoli is like a corn cereal. There will be 5 candles on the altar, 1 for each of the 4 directions and 1 for the 5th direction, the center. So this is fascinating that the day he chose was the day of the harmonic convergence in 1987, which was a very magical calendrical day in the Maya civilization because it marked the end of a 13,000-year cycle and the beginning of another cycle. So how auspicious of a day was this for Don Elijio to perform the first Maya primicia on my farm. You see our little thatch hut there, far off to the right, and the thatch hut in the back. We were still living on old East Shell Farm with thatched buildings. There's Don Elijio pouring out the chocolate for the Maya spirits, and I'm there simply observing. And it was the most beautiful experience for Don Elijio to stand and chant in Maya the sacred primicia as we turned to the 4 directions, and finally the 9th cantico was for the earth. And to hear my name mentioned 9 times in a Maya chant. And later, Don Elijio told me, I asked the benevolent Maya spirits that they would give you every consideration that they would give me, that they would look after you, keep you well, and when I am gone, they would continue to teach you in dream visions and to look after your safety. And so all of those primicias that you have attended have been to honor our mentor, Don Elijio, and to also honor the 9 benevolent Maya spirits.
Anything anyone would like to just pop into chat? Oh, there we go. There's our, just tell us who that, when was that last picture taken, Rosita? And then we're going to open the floor to questions.
That looks like that was Michael Ballack took that picture. So that had to be 1988. 1989, somewhere in there, because we were already doing the National Cancer Institute research program with Don Elijio's medicinal plants. So I would say 1989.
Yeah, such happy smiles, such happy smiles. Don Elijio, he loved his hats, didn't he?
Yeah, he loved, that's what that one says, Cigarama.
How many years, Rosita, did he work as a healer? How many years? I mean, so when did Don Elijio start his?
60, it was 60 years.
60 years. 60
but he
years.
always said, I've been doing this work for 40 years. He never got to 40. But actually it was 60. 60
and
years.
60 years of working, and you worked with him for his last 13 and were with him right
When
through to the
people
end.
came searching, they were looking for the doctor. And he'd say, there's no doctor here. They'd say, well, Don Elijio, you just missed him. They ran him out of town. They said he was nothing more than a charlatan and a necromancer. He's gone. You missed him. Then he would say, I'm the doctor and the clown. Which do you want to see right now, the doctor or the clown? Remember, he said, I could make the dead laugh.
Well, you know, and I think that's a pretty useful skill. So I've got a few questions about his prayers, and these get shared in our wisdom classes. We've got a whole wisdom series, which are now being taught around the world. Do you want to just say a couple of words about the wisdom classes?
Yeah, in the wisdom classes, I myself and the other wisdom teachers, we share Don Elijio's spiritual healing practice for people with all manner of emotional/spiritual ailments that most people in the world consider to be emotional problems, but they're really spiritual ailments. Fright right now, the world is in kind of a state of susto or fright. And then there's envy and there's grief. So there are many spiritual ailments. Some are common, some are less common, but they are treated with prayers that we teach you in class and the spiritual baths. We're we use usually many different types of herbs in the spiritual baths and copal. So yeah, that's what we teach in the wisdom of water, plants, and prayers, how to treat what are mostly considered emotional ailments as spiritual ailments without psychotherapy.
So these classes are available literally around the world. We have teachers in Europe, we have teachers in Belize, we have a class coming up in France quite shortly in Belize. We've got Vivian in Greece. So this work is literally flying around the world. How is Ixchel supporting the community? One of the things that we have just done very recently, I'm just going to talk a little bit and give Rosita a moment to have a rest, is Rosita, Bryn and myself were recently in Mexico. It was organized by one of our practitioners down in Mexico, and we took this work back to the Mexican people, and Rosita got to teach in Spanish, which was a leap for her. I was in the very early stages. You could say I couldn't speak Spanish. There was one moment where I thought I was asking people to massage their necks at the end of the treatment, and it turns out I was asking them to massage, I'm going to say the word arseholes or anuses for those who don't speak English the way I do. So Rosita, yeah, how was it to take the work back to Mexico?
It was wonderful, amazing, just so heartwarming for me to feel that I was continuing to meet that promise that I will take care of his people when he's gone. Hilary and I taught a group of midwives, doulas, and even one medical doctor. And at the end of the training, the medical doctor said, I have delivered 2,000 babies. I have been a medical doctor for 20 years, and I never knew that the uterus was held up by ligaments. And I never knew that we could do so much with our hands. So absolutely thrilled to be able to share these treatments that Don Elijio, and of course in pregnancy, it was Hortense Robinson's, mostly that was her work. But then to do the abdominal therapy in Mexico was the completion of a promise and the completion of a dream for me to go back to Mexico with this work. I have
Wonderful.
taught that class in Guatemala, but never yet in Mexico.
So we have practitioners. Rosita has more recently been teaching teachers how to share this work in Belize. You were running children's camps, weren't you? And the last time you were teaching teachers in Belize how to do that. Maybe you'd like to share a moment about that.
Yes, that was as a result of a dream vision that came on the very day that Don Elijio passed away. We had carried him home from the hospital because, again, his grandson insisted that he be taken to the hospital after he had had a stroke. So the doctor said, your friend is brain dead. Take him home and let him pass away in peace in his own bed. So we brought him back to San Antonio, put him into bed, and then my husband and I said, let's go and leave him with his villagers and we'll come back in the morning. Well, at 6:10 in the morning, I had not really been sleeping very well, and a dream vision occurred. And I see Don Elijio lying on the floor next to my bed, and he's in the throes of death, and he died. The moment he died, he stood up, a young man, black hair, no wrinkles, handsome, copper-skinned face. And he sat down on the bed next to me, and he gave me a big, big hug and a kiss. And he said, I love you, Rosita. And I said, I love you, Don Elijio. And then with his hand, he went like that, pointing to the corner of the room. And in the corner of the room, sitting on a little stool, was a child I knew to be Gonzalo. Gonzalo's face changed to Maria. Maria changed to Juanito. Juanito changed to Paula. And Don Elijio said, take the children as though they were your own. Train them and teach them to help each other. Take the children as though they were your own. Teach them and train them to help each other. And so my husband and I thought about that for a couple of years, and we decided that the best thing we could do would be a summer bush medicine camp for children to teach them about traditional healing and about medicinal plants and how to help each other. So we ran summer bush medicine camp for 24 children for 24 years. And then COVID So we had no camp for a couple of years, and then we decided that it was too many problems taking care of children during COVID times. So the last 3 camps have been for teachers, for primary school teachers who come to stay here in my home for a week. And we teach them about medicinal plants and traditional healing, and hoping that they will take it back to the classroom. So
Amazing. So we have classes that are online as well as in place. We've got people going, where's a class coming to Michigan? Is there a class coming to the West Coast, the East Coast, the wherever? We also do very simple short classes online in the Wisdom series, where you can learn how to make a lustral bowl, to understand some of the prayers and the water. But if you want to dive into it to work with clients, then you need to get yourself to a full length class. Those classes, they're called one-day classes, your water ritual. Thank you, Vivian. I'm starting to trip over my words. The longer classes are for those who want to do the work with the plants and the herbs and the prayers. For anyone who is looking to receive a treatment, then please go to our website. We have therapists literally all around the world, and I'm speaking to practitioners as well as those who maybe don't do this work. When did you as a practitioner last receive a massage or an abdominal massage from someone? So take some time to see if there's a therapist near you. If you've never had a treatment, then we can even teach you how to do the abdominal massage online. We are looking to spread our wings, and as I said, we've already managed to have 600 students in the last 2.5 years, so we're moving and we're getting places. So if you're looking for a treatment, go to our website. If you're looking for a class, go to our website, or you can drop an email to hello, Amanda Porter, who is somewhere in the midst of these boxes. She's waving for any of you who can see her. You're going to be your first point of call at hello at Abdominal Therapy Collective. I should be helping her, but I have to say I'm not very good. She does most of them. For anyone who is who's a member and who would like to get into our collective cafe, then yes, the collective cafe, we are trying to migrate from Facebook to the collective cafe. And that's where you will find as practitioners, all your documents, videos, access to classes for you as practitioners, access to a huge amount. Now then, my fellow Sun members and directors, you may have to shoot me now, but I'm gonna say, if you're not in the collective cafe, send an email to Vivian at member. She's waving membership member. What is it, Vivian? Stick it in the stick it. Oh, or you can send it to hello.
It's members at
abdominaltherapycollective.com. So if you haven't made it into the cafe, either email your teacher. If it's me, you're not going to get a lot of useful information, or email Vivian directly and she will be able to help you get in. And we really do encourage you to come in. Amanda Porter, you got your hand up.
Head over to, if your educator at any point gave you the student portal, you can get into the collective cafe via your student portal. There's a direct link that says invite me to the cafe. So for anybody that has that link, then that would be my preferred way for you to get in, because you'd be straight there.
Yeah, there you go. Don't just email Mandy and Vivian, go to that link, what they said. So anyone got anything else they'd like to ask, say?
I have one more.
Yeah, all right, you can have one more.
I do feel like we should end on a high note.
Yes.
During my apprenticeship, the 13 years, somewhere around the 7th year, I was feeling extremely inadequate, realizing that Don Elijio is not just a traditional healer. He's not only a herbalist, he's actually one of the last living Maya shamans on earth that may ever live again in our time. And I thought, I don't know what to do with this. It feels so important. I don't know how to hold it so that it could live from generation to generation. So I took this, my question was, I decided I would make a pilgrimage to Palenque at the Maya site in Mexico. And my question was to the Maya spirits, how can I best serve God and humanity with what Don Elijio has taught me? And I took that question to Palenque, and I spent one full day sitting and meditating atop the observatory there, which is where they looked at the stars and the planets. So I sat there praying and meditating all day long. And that night, in a hotel room just a little bit outside of the Maya site, in the middle of the night, again, it's around 3 o'clock in the morning, I had my sastoon in its little clay jar. By then, Don Elijio had gifted me a sastoon, and I worked the sastoon just before I went to sleep, asking that the Maya spirits would give me the answer to this question, how best to serve. In the middle of the night, I see Maya Lacandone Indian man walk into the room. He stands at the door, and he's got that black hair cut in bangs here and long straight black hair down to his waist, wearing just a plain white cotton tunic. He walked into the room and he sat down on the bed next to me, and I could feel the bed sink as he sat down. And he looked at me, sort of put his arm around me and whispered in my ear, teach. What you're planning to do with classes is fine. Teach. Then he reached over and he took my sastoon in its little clay jar and he worked it around and around in a Maya chant, saying something. I don't know what he said, but he was working that with the Maya chant. And then he got up and he said, I'm going now, but I'll be back tomorrow. Well, I haven't seen him since, but I felt like those were literally my marching orders from the Maya spirits to tell me that the best way to keep Don Eligio's healing alive is to share it, to teach it. And so that's what we're all about, sanctioned by the Maya spirits.
Thank you. Yes, that is what we're all about. And there is a whole bunch of people who are desperate to become teachers of our work. And I hear you banging on the door. You're dropping me private messages. You're sending me emails as I'm sitting here. That will be happening for you all. But the main thing is we are going to be doing more of these events, and we're going to be asking you to come. And so we look forward to seeing you again. Some of them will be Rosita talking, and you know, I know that I'm not alone saying that we can listen to Rosita's stories forever. This
And
is
I only
going to
got
be,
through half of them, Hillary.
I know we only got, well, I'm not, you know, well, maybe
I'm
we'll
really
do,
quite frustrated. I've got this list of stories I didn't get to finish.
well, hey, we can do it again.
Do it
Just make sure
again.
you know the ones that you didn't tell.
That's right, I will.